Hello everyone, and welcome back to Optima, home of the Optima APOS series product group. In this video, we're going to have a closer look at the device and hardware maintenance modules. The hardware module allows you to set up and maintain the hardware definitions for your APOS devices, and the device module allows you to set up and maintain all devices on your network, and then link your hardware definitions to each device. Defining the hardware for each device allows you to have multiple APOS devices and APOS device types in one network using a single project file. This also means that you may have multiple APOS devices sharing a kitchen printer or a payment terminal, for example. Or alternatively, each APOS may have its own payment terminal with different connection parameters. In order to support this, each APOS device on your network must be defined, and each APOS must have its own hardware definitions. I'll show you how to do that right after this. Let's start by looking at the hardware types currently supported. You may set up one or more receipt printers for each of your APOS devices. Normally, you would set this up to use the receipt printer built into the APOS. So the model would be set to the internal 58mm for the AP01, AP02, and AP04, or the internal 80mm for the AP03, AP05, and AP05 Lite. Please note that the AP05 and AP05 Lite can also be set to use the 58mm paper rolls with an additional adapter. When you select one of the internal models, the connection type will automatically be set to internal. The receipt printer language may be set to use the English, French, Spanish, or Chinese character set. As long as the corresponding language has been defined on your APOS, the receipts will be printed using the defined character set. The Use Second Names option relates more to the kitchen printers, so I will explain this option when we have a closer look at the kitchen printer hardware type. For each of your defined printers, you may add a header and footer. To add a new line, click on the plus sign at the top right. Then double-click in the newly created row and enter the caption. Select the font you wish to display for each of the lines and whether it should be printed in bold, underline, and justified, either left, center, or right. To delete a row, simply select the row and click on the minus sign. You may also set up your receipt printer to print a graphic image or logo at the top of each receipt. For a 58mm printer, the layout is 383 pixels by 230 pixels. For the 80mm printer, the layout is 575 pixels by 230 pixels. Clicking on the graphic import icon will open up the graphic maintenance window and display either a 58mm layout or an 80mm layout, depending on the type of printer you're working with. You may set up a separate image for the 58mm and for the 80mm layout. To insert a new image, press on the plus sign. Navigate to the file you want to add using the Open File navigation window. Any BMP, JPEG, GIF, TIFF, or PNG file may be used. However, due to the printer's color limitations, this image will be converted to a black and white image. It is therefore recommended to start with a black and white image. Once the image has been selected, it will be inserted in the layout area. When the cursor is positioned above the image, the mouse cursor will change from arrow icon to a hand icon. To resize the image, click and drag the mouse when the cursor is above any of the image borders. The cursor will change to a double-headed arrow, indicating the direction of motion. To move the image, click and drag the mouse when the hand is directly above it. You may save your changes at any time by clicking on the Save icon. Or if you close the window, PCProg will ask you if you want to save your changes. You may click on Cancel to remain in the window, or click on Yes or No, depending if you want to save your changes or not, and then close the window. In addition to a receipt printer, you may also want to set up a kitchen printer. You may use the APOS internal printer for both a receipt printer and a kitchen printer, like in the case of a food truck. But in most cases, the kitchen printer would be set up as an external printer. Let's insert a new piece of hardware and set it up as an external printer. The connection type will default to Ethernet, allowing you to enter the Ethernet IP and port for the printer. When setting up an external printer, you must ensure that the IP is on the same network as your APOS device. If it is not properly defined, this will slow down your register, since GoPOS will spend unnecessary time searching and trying to connect to the external printer. It is best to remove any unused external printers from your program. The Use Second Name option allows you to send department, product, and modifier names in a different language to the kitchen. To do this, you would select the appropriate language to define the character set, and then enable the Use Second Names option. The second names caption defined for the departments, products, and modifiers would then be printed on the kitchen printer when sending orders to the kitchen. A customer display is another piece of hardware that we would normally want to include in our program. This would normally be set up as an internal 2-line display for the AP03, internal 4-line display for the AP02 and AP04, or as a 10-inch customer display for the AP05. The AP05 Lite does not have an internal customer display, but you may connect Optima's OPT CD7 external customer display using one of the USB ports found at the back of the unit. The internal 10-inch customer display built into the AP05 is actually split into two sections. One section is used to display the current transaction, and the other section is used to display advertisements. To use the advertisement feature, you need to copy your images to the AP05 slideshow folder. Instructions on how to do this can be found in the help documentation. Another common piece of hardware you would want to add to your setup is a payment terminal. GoPOS supports Global Payments, Moneros, PayFacto, DC Direct, and the PAX payment terminals. All of these, except for PayFacto, use Ethernet connections in a semi-integrated interface to communicate with the payment merchant. The only exception to this is PayFacto, which must be set up as an internal connection with URL, API key, company number, merchant number, and terminal number provided to you by the payment merchant. Once defined, the payment terminal must be linked to one of the defined tenders. We will come back to this when we have a closer look at the tenders module. All Optima barcode scanners, as well as the supported Honeywell and Zebra scanners, are plug and play and do not need to be set up in hardware maintenance. The only exception to this is the Datalogic Magellan 8500, which has a built-in scanner with scale. This scanner must be properly defined and connected using a serial connection. In most cases, scales must also be defined and connected using serial connections. Except for the Datalogic Magellan 8500 and virtual scales, which must be defined as internal connections. The virtual scale will prompt the user to manually enter the weight when dealing with scalable products. You may also set the type of rounding to use for each scale and enter the scale's defined capacity. The Enforce 0 before reading option will force the scale to reset to 0 before the next reading will be taken. Cache drawers are also plug and play and do not require any setup in the hardware maintenance module. Just be sure to plug the cache drawer into the RJ11 port marked drawer at the back of the APOS. Okay, we now have the hardware definitions we want to work with. where each piece of hardware we have on our network has been defined in PCProg. The next thing we need to do is to define the APOS device or devices that we want to communicate with, and then link our hardware to each device. Let's look at the hardware device maintenance module. Each APOS you wish to communicate with must be defined in the hardware device maintenance module. Here I have a single AP05 defined, where the APOS has a 10-inch customer display and an internal 80mm printer. The register ID has been set to 1, but can be changed to any number you wish. The register ID must be unique and should match the register number defined in Option Settings 14 in GoPOS on each of your APOS devices. It is also very important to have the register IDs that start at 1 and increment by 1 for each additional APOS if you intend on using inter-register communication, or IRC. We will get back to this later in this video. Enter a caption or name for your device and select the device type. Enter the TCP/IP of the device and the device port. Use to connect your APOS device when sending and receiving project files and reports. It is best practice to use fixed sequential IPs when setting up your APOS device on your network. Press and hold the Optima GoPOS logo on your APOS to display the About box. This window will display the terminal IP address of your APOS. The TCP/IP port for communication is set in setting option 35 on GoPOS. Please see the APOS help documentation for additional instructions on how to connect your APOS to your network. Once you have defined the communication parameters for your APOS device, selecting the device and clicking on the Connect button will attempt to connect the specific register using the defined device IP and port. If successful, a message will be displayed, and the device software version, database version, and serial number of the connected APOS will be updated. If the connected device does not match the defined APOS type, serial number, or register ID, a warning message will be displayed. Your device definition must match the actual APOS being connected to. The last thing we need to do is link our hardware definitions to the device. In this example, I have defined and linked an internal 80mm receipt printer and a 10-inch customer display to my AP05. If the hardware I wanted to add to my 05 has not been defined yet, then simply press on the hardware icon to bring you back to the hardware maintenance module. Or if you want to make a change to an existing hardware entry, simply double-click on the row. For example, let's say I have an external kitchen printer that I want to add to my 05. Press on the hardware icon, click on the plus icon to insert a new piece of hardware, select kitchen printer from the hardware type drop-down and select the appropriate model. In this case, I'm using one of Optima's kitchen printers, the OPT P250. Enter the IP and port of the unit and save your changes to close the window. Insert a new row by pressing on the plus and select the kitchen printer. And there you have it. We now have an AP05 defined with an internal receipt printer, an internal 10-inch customer display, and an external kitchen printer. If you have multiple APOS devices in your network, either with or without IRC, each of your APOS devices must be defined in PCProg. Let's add a new device to our network. Press on the plus icon in the bottom left of the screen to add a new device. Enter a unique register ID and select the device type. Enter the device IP and port and click on Connect. Again, if successful, a message will be displayed and the device software version, database version, and serial number of the connected APOS will be updated. If your connection failed, ensure that your device is connected with the valid IP and port on your network. On GoPause, press and hold the Optima GoPause logo to display the About pop-up window and confirm that the terminal IP address, as well as the TCP port in setting option 35 on GoPause, matches the IP and port you have entered in your device definition. Pressing on the register icon and then pressing on the home icon on GoPause will also help to refresh the communication. The next step is to add the hardware to our new APOS device. At the very least, you should have a receipt printer defined for each APOS. For my AP04, I have an internal 58mm printer that I can use. However, as you can see, I do not have an internal 58mm printer defined in hardware yet. I only have the 80mm printer. If I had a second AP05 instead of an AP04, I could share the same receipt printer definition. I would only need to define the receipt printer in the hardware once. But in this case, because it is a different paper format, I need to define both the 80mm receipt printer attached to my AP05 and define a 58mm receipt printer that I will link to my AP04. And the same thing applies to my customer display, since the AP04 only has a 4-line customer display. So let's add a customer display as well. The kitchen printer, however, because it is an external connection on the same network as both the AP04 and AP05, can be shared and only needs to be defined in hardware once. So as you can see, by defining all of your APOS devices and hardware attached to each device, we can share the same project file across your network. Changes can be made to your project and then sent to one or more of the APOS devices in your network. It is still recommended to use the same type of APOS device in one network, but units can be mixed and matched. Just be aware that due to the differences in size and orientation of the screens on each APOS type, it does require additional setup and work to define the keyboards destined for each device. We will discuss this later when we get to the keyboard maintenance module. Also, for inter-register communication, IRC, as well as for report and stock downloads, it is important that each APOS have its own unique sequential register ID. And a fixed sequential terminal IP. Setting 16 must also be set to the number of APOS units on your network. For example, if I have 3 APOS units on my network, then each APOS will have a unique register number starting with 1. So setting 15 on GoPOS will be set to 1 on the first unit, 2 on the second, and 3 on the third. And all units must have the number of APOS units in the network, setting 16, set to 3. Each APOS must also have a fixed sequential terminal IP address. So if the base IP of Unit 1 is 10.0.0.201, then Unit 2 must have a fixed IP of 10.0.0.202, and Unit 3 must have a fixed IP of 10.0.0.203. Please also note that when updating the register number on GoPOS, you must reboot the unit before the change will take effect. We will discuss setting up IRC again when we look at the settings module and also look at communicating with your APOS devices when we have a closer look at the send and receive modules. But for now, that is all I want to cover on device and hardware definitions. So stay tuned, and in the next video, we will have a closer look at the user's maintenance module.
So why don't you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get notified as soon as we upload any new videos. Also, if you want to learn more about the Optima APOS series line of products or need any POS accessories such as barcode scanners, printers, Windows PC POS terminals, and more, visit www.optimagopos.ca. Again, that's www.optimagopos.ca. I'm Brandon from Optima, and I'll see you again.